The bill on Article 23 will be gazetted on Friday and have its first and second readings in LegCo on the same day. Foreign Minister Wang Yi stresses China will continue to pursue peaceful and win-win relations with its global partners. Good evening and thank you for joining us. The Executive Council convened a special meeting this afternoon to review the draft legislation for Article 23, aiming to have it taken to the legislature for the first and second readings tomorrow morning. The very same day tomorrow, the Legislative Council is expected to gazette the draft security bill.
以早一日得一日嘅原則完成立法。
A call for the swift handling of Article 23 legislation by Chief Executive John Lee when he returned to the SAR from Beijing on Tuesday. Just 2 days later, it's understood the Executive Council convened a special meeting in the afternoon. Secretary for Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Eric Zhang gave no comment to the press as to what was discussed. But a government announcement came soon after the 2-hour meeting. The statement said that the Safeguarding National Security Bill will be gazetted on Friday. Chief Executive John Lee had written to LegCo President Andrew Leung saying that the legislative work on Article 23 of the Basic Law is a constitutional duty for the entire SAR, and the legislature should make every effort to complete the legislation process as soon as possible. The CE said the earlier that national security can be safeguarded, the earlier the city can fully focus on its economic development and maintaining its long-term prosperity and stability. In a prompt reply, the LegCo president said, given the necessity and urgency of the bill, a special meeting will be convened at 11 a.m. on Friday for its first and second readings, the same day of its planned gazetting. Tam Yu Chung, a former lawmaker and vice president of the Chinese Association of Hong Kong and Macau Studies, said the expedited procedure could build more trust and enhance support from the central government towards Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Secretary for Justice Paul Lam and Secretary for Security Chris Tang attended a LegCo meeting on Article 23 for a second day. On the proposed incitement with intent charges, which cover intention to stir hatred and hostility towards Hong Kong and different districts in China, the Justice Chief said it doesn't include personal vendettas, but could encompass insulting descriptions about mainland tourists, such as incitement of hatred towards parallel traders in Shengshui. Lawmaker Peter Kuhn, also an Anglican pastor, relayed the religious sector's concerns about political confessions.
During confession, if somebody expresses anger towards the government, if this person has some radical thought, there is no need to report on his confessions. Not reporting it will not constitute an offense. However, if you hear about any harmful act, whether or not you are somebody from the religious sector or not, you should try to convince the person to do otherwise.
Secretary for Justice Paul Lam reiterated again today that while the government is considering allowing those arrested for state secrets offences to be entitled to the public interest defence, the threshold will be high and the conditions will be clearly spelled out in the bill. In Beijing, Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang today attended a full meeting of Hong Kong members of the National People's Congress. It was the first time that Ding, a Politburo Standing Committee member who is responsible for Hong Kong and Macau affairs, attended such a meeting during the annual 2 sessions. The meeting was also attended by other senior Beijing officials. After the meeting, Ma Fengkuok, head of the Hong Kong delegation of NPC deputies, quoted Ding as saying that the central government fully supports the SAR's legislative work on Article 23 of the Basic Law. According to Ma, Ding also said Beijing wants Hong Kong to expand international cooperation while improving its integration into the country's overall development. At a press conference during the annual session of the 14th National People's Congress, Foreign Minister Wang Yi stressed China will continue to pursue peaceful and win-win relationships with its global partners, and he criticized the U.S. for its attempts to suppress China, adding that Beijing is sincere in its goal to achieve peaceful reunification with Taiwan. Timothy Lee reports.
A press conference on China's foreign policy was held during the annual session of the 14th National People's Congress in Beijing today. Sino-U.S. relations remain a hot topic. Foreign Minister Wong Yi said the relationship between the two major powers have improved after the meeting between the two nations' leaders in California last year. But he stressed that issues still remain, owing primarily to Washington's misperception of China and Washington's unilateral list of sanctions, which he said has reached levels of absurdity. Wong expressed confidence that both nations will be able to find ways to get along with each other. He urged the U.S. to view China's development objectively and rationally. Regarding cross-strait relations, China's top diplomat reiterated Beijing's sincere hope for peaceful reunification. He emphasized those advocating Taiwan independence are the main culprits of instability in the region. Wong said the issue of Taiwan is China's internal affair and called on the international community to oppose the island's secession. On other global issues, Wong remarked that China has been increasing efforts to push for peaceful resolutions in Ukraine and Gaza over the past year. On the Israel-Hamas war, Wong called for a restoration of justice to the Palestinian people. He said the full implementation of a two-state solution is the only way to break the vicious cycle of violence. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Getting aid to the hungry in Gaza is a huge problem. Israel is coming under pressure from political allies and international agencies to allow more. The UN is predicting a quarter of those in Gaza are facing death by starvation if things don't change soon. David Garrett reports.
Gaza refugees go from tent to tent looking for spare food. Many of those hungry on the lookout are children. Some are willing to sell their food, but those in need don't have money. There is no fish, no chicken. We cannot cook a good meal, Ayub says. There is nothing. The price of one cabbage is 20 shekels. One piece of chicken is 70, or about 150 Hong Kong dollars. Agencies say 1 in 6 under 2 years old are suffering from acute malnutrition. There is also concern that because of conditions of storage and cooking, food could make people ill. The continuing war and a security blockade by Israel have made it almost impossible to get aid to those in need. Expensive and imprecise airdrops are becoming the only way to get aid in. The World Food Programme says the Strip needs double the current supply to meet the needs of a starving population. The WFP has resorted to airdrops after their first convoy going into Gaza for a fortnight was turned back by the Israeli army. The WFP says it does have enough to feed people if its staff can get the food in.
It's important to reach the people in every possible way. The land access and the crossings need to be opened up so that we can be able to get enough commodities that is sustainable to reach the people. And the only way to do it is actually if we had road access to those communities. We've done airdrops as a symbolic. It's not something that we want to continue doing.
The WFP says a truck on Tuesday was looted by a large, desperate crowd. Here, near Gaza City, a truck arrives with flour and more. Some have already climbed onto the vehicle to get the supplies. Later, men chase after the convoy in a chaotic frenzy. Many do leave the collection point with white sacks slung over shoulders. But the EU and the US say scenes like this must not continue.
The scenes that you were able to see with regard to crowds of hungry people running after parachutes falling on the ground, this is not the proper way of handling, receiving and distributing humanitarian aid.
It cannot continue this way. And so you have seen the United States take action to airdrop food supplies in. You have seen us take action to fund the delivery of humanitarian assistance. You have seen us announce that we are exploring a maritime option to deliver humanitarian assistance through new routes, but it still is incumbent upon the government of Israel to do more as well.
Some Palestinians say they have been forced to eat animal fodder. This crowd of people say they are surviving on potatoes in a tomato stew for now. David Garrett, TVB News.
Canada's government has reached a settlement with one of 2 Canadians who were detained in China for nearly 3 years on national security charges during a diplomatic spat between Ottawa and Beijing. Canadian newspaper The Globe and Mail reported Michael Spavor reached a mediated settlement worth about $6 million Canadian dollars after he threatened to sue the government and his fellow prisoner Michael Kovrig. The Globe and Mail reporter Spavor alleged he was arrested because he had given information about North Korea to Kovrig, who worked for the Canadian embassy in China, and passed it on to the Canadian government. Kovrig told the newspaper he acted properly in his dealings with Spavor and followed standard regulations governing diplomats. Canada has long maintained the two men were held to pressure Canada to release Meng Wanzhou, a senior executive of Huawei Technologies. Kovrig and Spavor were taken into Chinese custody 9 days after Meng was arrested in 2018 at the request of U.S. authorities while she was changing planes at Vancouver International Airport. China has said the two Canadians were suspected of crimes endangering national security. Still ahead, Joe Biden and Donald Trump tried to win over Nikki Haley backer support. The government's 1823 hotline fails to resolve many complaints. And Live Golf Hong Kong 2024 is expected to bring $40 million to the city. Welcome back. U.S. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump, easily dominating Super Tuesday primaries and caucuses, have unofficially set up a November rematch. Now, with Nikki Haley dropping out of the race for the White House, there is a new battle for her supporters. More in this report from NBC News.
This is 220.
Tonight, the rematch, though polls show most Americans don't want it. After their massive wins in nearly every Super Tuesday contest, President Biden and former President Trump appear set for another face-off, with Nikki Haley now dropping out of the Republican race.
In all likelihood, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee when our party convention meets in July. I congratulate him and wish him well.
Haley then challenging her former boss, whom she pointedly did not endorse.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
The battle now on for her backers. President Biden urging Haley supporters to join him in opposing Mr. Trump, writing, "I know there is a lot we won't agree on. I hope and believe we can find common ground." Mr. Trump inviting Haley supporters to join, quote, the greatest movement in the history of our nation, while boasting Haley got trounced last night.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason.
The former president carrying 14 of 15 states in play overnight, NBC News projects, securing landslide victories from Maine to Minnesota to California, with Haley winning only Vermont, allowing Mr. Trump to focus fully on President Biden.
He's the worst president in the history of our country. There's never been anything like what's happening to our country.
Mr. Trump also securing the endorsement of Mitch McConnell, who had sharply criticized the former president's conduct around January 6th and was the last remaining member of Republican congressional leadership not to support his return to the White House. But today, McConnell praising Trump, writing, "During his presidency, we worked together to accomplish great things for the American people." Despite her big defeats, Haley did attract more than a quarter of the vote in many primaries. Trump's challenge, Haley voters unwilling to shift their support.
There's no way I want Trump in office.
Meanwhile, NBC News projecting President Biden won nearly every Democratic contest, except for a surprising loss in the American Samoa caucus. Recent polls show Mr. Trump leading Mr. Biden in a head-to-head matchup within the margin of error. Now the Trump campaign will look to scale up and shift focus towards November.
A jury convicted a movie weapons supervisor of involuntary manslaughter in the fatal shooting of a cinematographer by actor Alec Baldwin during a rehearsal on the set of the Western movie Rust. The proceedings were a preamble to Baldwin's scheduled trial in July on the single charge of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors said movie armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed unknowingly brought live ammunition onto the set of Rust at a ranch on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico. And the ammunition was mixed with dummy rounds before the fatal shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins in October 2021. In closing arguments, prosecutor Carrie Morrissey described constant, never-ending safety failures on the set and Gutierrez-Reed's astonishing lack of diligence with gun safety. State District Court Judge Mary Marlowe Somer did not immediately set a sentencing date. Lead attorney Jason Bowles said afterwards that Gutierrez-Reed will appeal the conviction, which carries a penalty of up to 18 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. Back locally, in last year's policy address, the government proposed setting up a designated museum on national development and achievements at the current site of the Science Museum in Tsim Sha Tsui. Now, there might be a change in the choice of locations. Director of Leisure and Cultural Services Vincent Lau revealed today that the department is having discussions with the Development Bureau to come up with other possible locations which are more convenient and with a better layout for the National Development Museum. Under the original plan, the Science Museum will be moved to the site of the Hong Kong Heritage Museum in Sha Tin. Lau said they still aim to finalize and submit a proposal for the National Development Museum in the early half of this year for scrutiny in the Legislative Council. An investigation by the Office of the Ombudsman found that the government's 1823 hotline failed to resolve more than 4,000 complaint cases over a one-month period. The Ombudsman noted responding departments often shirked responsibility and that there is a need for a revised mechanism. The investigation found around 56% of complaints to the hotline were not resolved within a month. In one such incident, when residents complained of construction waste being strewn on streets, the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department and Highways Department both passed the responsibility to the Lands Department. The latter replied saying that the problem should instead be resolved by the Highways Department. The waste was only removed 4 months later. Meanwhile, a separate investigation found inspections of private licensed swimming pools by the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department to be lacking. The government announced Rex Au Yeung Pak Kyun has been reappointed as chairman of the MTR Corporation for 1.5 years. And the MTR reported nearly 1.9 billion passenger rides last year, which is more or less back to pre-pandemic levels. But cross-border passenger figures were still behind pre-pandemic figures, as Israel saw 71 million cross-border rides. As for property-related earnings, the MTR sold $2 billion worth of real estate last year, down 80% from the previous year as a result of the lackluster property market. Taking into account the effect of property earnings on MTR fares, some analysts believe there is likely to be a fare hike this year. The government-sponsored Live Golf Hong Kong tournament tees off tomorrow. The organizer expects the event will bring $40 million to the city. The hotel industry, as one of the beneficiary sectors, has already witnessed a salary raise from pre-pandemic levels as a result of the mega events. Sakurib has more.
The government is to make mega events one of the new engines in boosting the economy. Blessed by the government with an earmark and 16 million Hong Kong dollars in subsidies, the Leave Hong Kong Golf Tour is expected to bring in $30 million in tax revenues from its $200 million of prize money. Backed by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, the organizer expects the 3-day tournament to bring $40 million of direct and indirect economy benefits, which include bringing in an expected 10,000 plus visitors from 29 countries and regions to the golf course each day.
For those people who are staying here, they're eating and dining out. They're experiencing the city as well, so a lot of spend from that perspective. And then you've got the money that's spent on the delivery of the tournament, which is, I'd say, over 65% of our suppliers are local to Hong Kong.
The tournament also includes entertainment area to cater non-golfer audience. For example, there will be a concert taking place on the stage behind me on Saturday night, which is not a common practice in other golf events. The Hong Kong Golf Club, which provide venue and infrastructure assistance, said the event also benefits the hotel industry.
In terms of players and our supporting staff, we have on average around 600 rooms occupied by our organizers per night. So over a period of from the start of the construction, which is 3-4 months ago, until probably a lot of players will stay after the tournament to enjoy Hong Kong.
As more mega events are coming, Hector Ngai from the Hotels, Food and Beverages Employees Association said there has been more than $1,000 rise in salaries in the sector, which are now 10% higher than pre-pandemic levels. Due to the manpower shortage, he said the industry will hire more part-time workers to help. Sakura Ip, TVB News.
And that's the news. Thank you for watching.